A black man in a simple hoodie entered a luxury car dealership. When the manager called security to remove him, his calm smile made everyone freeze as he pulled something from his pocket. The autumn sun hit the glass walls of Elite Motors, casting long shadows across the showroom floor. James Anderson pulled his gray hoodie closer, more out of habit than cold, as he stood outside the dealership. His hand touched the door handle, and he felt the familiar twitch in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had 40 years ago when he first tried to walk through these doors. Just another morning, he muttered to himself, pushing the door open. The showroom looked exactly like it had in the paperwork photos. 3 rows of luxury vehicles gleamed under LED lights, their chrome details reflecting the morning sun. The marble floor clicked under his shoes as he walked past a midnight blue Mercedes S-Class. James ran his finger along the hood, leaving a clean line in the light dust. A young salesman in a crisp black suit glanced up from his desk, his eyes moving from James's gray hair to his worn hoodie. The salesman's smile faltered for a second before he looked back down at his computer screen. "Can I help you, sir?" Another salesman called out from behind a glass desk, not bothering to stand up. "Just looking around for now. Thank you." James kept his voice steady, practiced. He'd used that same tone countless times over the years. In countless showrooms, the memory hit him as he passed the spot where it had happened. 1983. He'd saved for 2 years at his first job, ready to buy his first new car. He'd worn his best suit that day, carried a briefcase with all his paperwork. The manager hadn't even let him test drive the car. "Sir." A different voice now, sharp and authoritative. "Sir, can I help you find something specific?" James turned to face Sarah Mitchell, the sales manager. He recognized her from the staff photos, tailored navy suit, hair pulled back tight, pearl earrings catching the light. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached, each step precise and measured. "Just taking in the atmosphere," James said, noting how her jaw tightened at his casual tone. "Beautiful showroom you have here." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This is a luxury car dealership, sir. Our vehicles start at 6 figures. She emphasized luxury like she was explaining it to a child. James nodded, looking around the showroom again. "I can see that. That S-Class is particularly impressive." He gestured to the blue Mercedes. "The new model has some interesting improvements over last year's. Are you in the market for a vehicle, sir?" Sarah's tone made it clear she already knew her answer. "You could say that." James walked over to a white BMW M5. His father had wanted one just like it, back in '75. He'd had the money too, saved up from 30 years of running his own garage. But they wouldn't sell it to him here. Same showroom, different decade, same story. A small crowd of employees had gathered near the sales desk. 2 young salesmen whispered to each other, casting glances in his direction. A woman in a blazer pretended to organize brochures while watching the scene unfold. "Sir," Sarah's voice had an edge now. "If you're not here to make a purchase, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." James turned to face her fully. "And why would you assume I'm not here to make a purchase?" Sarah's face flushed slightly. "Sir, these vehicles require substantial financial commitment. Our clients typically make appointments and—" She paused, looking at his hoodie again. "Dress appropriately for the occasion." The whispers from the sales desk grew louder. A customer who had been examining a Porsche was now watching them, phone in hand. "I see." James kept his voice level. "And what would be appropriate dress for spending a few $1,000,000? Sarah's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm trying to be polite. This is a prestigious establishment. We have certain standards. Standards," James repeated. The word hung in the air between them. "Like the standards you had in 1983. Sarah blinked. "Excuse me. August 15th, 1983. I came in here to buy a car. Had every document ready, full price in cash." James gestured around the showroom. Different paint on the walls back then, but same attitude behind the desk. A young salesman, Kevin, according to his name tag, stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, maybe we should dash." "That was 40 years ago," Sarah cut him off sharply. "And it has nothing to do with now. Sir, I'm asking you one last time to leave." James slipped his hand into his pocket, feeling the folded papers there. One movement, and he could end this. Show her the ownership documents. Watch her face change. But something made him wait. "And if I don't leave?" he asked quietly. Sarah pulled out her phone. "Then I'll call security, and they'll escort you out." Her finger hovered over the keypad. Your choice. The showroom had gone completely silent. Kevin the salesman had taken another step forward, looking uncertain. The customer with the phone was definitely recording now. James thought about his father, about that day in '75, about all the days like this, all the showrooms, all the standards and certain types of clients. Make your call, he said softly. Sarah's fingers jabbed at her phone. Security to the main showroom. Immediately, she looked at James with open disdain now. I suggest you start walking toward the exit. Save yourself some embarrassment. James stayed where he was, his hand still in his pocket. Through the glass walls, he could see two security guards approaching. Behind them, a black Rolls-Royce Ghost caught the morning sun, its Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament gleaming. His father would have loved that car. Sarah smiled tightly as the security guards entered. Remove this man from the premises, she ordered, and make sure he doesn't return. The guards moved toward James, their faces professionally blank. Kevin the salesman looked like he wanted to say something but remained silent. James felt the weight of the papers in his pocket. Not yet, he thought. Not quite yet. The bigger guard reached for his arm. Sir, please come with us. James looked at Sarah, at her satisfied smile, at the pearl earrings catching the light just so. He thought about 40 years of moments like this, about his father's dream of that white BMW, about all the doors that hadn't opened and all the ones he'd kicked down anyway. Sometimes, he realized, you had to let a moment play out fully before you could change it. The security guard's hand gripped James's arm firmly but not roughly. Training kicking in, James thought. They'd been taught how to remove people without causing a scene. This way, sir, the guard said quietly. Take your hands off me. James's voice carried across the showroom. Not loud, but clear. I'm a customer in a public business. Sarah Mitchell stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. A customer? She laughed, the sound sharp and cold. Sir, you haven't even asked about prices. You haven't spoken to a salesperson. You're loitering, and you're making our actual customers uncomfortable. The customer with the phone was still recording. Two more had joined him, their phones held at waist level, trying to be discreet. I know the prices, James said calmly. That Ghost over there? $850,000, base model. Add the executive package. You're looking at just over $1 million. He nodded toward the Mercedes. S-Class starts at $225. That particular build? About $350. Sarah's smile tightened. Anyone can Google prices, sir. That doesn't make you a customer. Kevin, the young salesman, cleared his throat. Ms. Mitchell, he does seem to know the inventory dash. Quiet. Sarah snapped. She turned back to James. Security, remove him. Now. The second guard moved to James's other side. James didn't resist, but he didn't help either, standing perfectly still. You know what I remember most about 1983? James asked, his voice conversational. Not getting turned away. Not the looks from the other customers. Not even the manager's smirk when he told me to leave. He looked directly at Sarah. I remember driving to the Mercedes dealership across town. Bought a car there. Then another. Started reselling them. Built my first lot. Fascinating story. Sarah's voice dripped with sarcasm. You can tell it outside. Started small. James continued as if she hadn't spoken. Used cars first. Then certified pre-owned. Then new vehicles. One lot became two. Two became five. He smiled slightly. Funny how things work out. The security guards exchanged glances, their grip loosening slightly. 20 years ago, James said, I tried to buy this dealership. Your predecessor wouldn't even take the meeting. Said it wasn't for sale. Not to me, anyway. A small crowd had gathered near the sales desk. 3 customers, 7 employees, all watching. All recording. Sarah's face flushed red. I don't care if you own every dealership in the state. In this showroom, I'm the manager, and I'm telling you to leave. You're right, James nodded. You are the manager. Today. Something in his tone made Sarah pause. The security guard's hands fell away from his arms. What's that supposed to mean? Sarah demanded. James reached into his pocket. Sarah tensed, but he just pulled out his phone. Tell me something, Ms. Mitchell. Did corporate mention anything about the ownership change? Any meeting scheduled for this morning? The color drained from Sarah's face. How do you dash? Simple question. James scrolled through his phone casually. Yes or no? There's a meeting at 10, Kevin offered. Whole staff. Mandatory. Kevin. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. One more word and you're fired. Go ahead, James said mildly. Fire him. I'm curious to see how that works out. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? Not at all. James put his phone away. Just making an observation. Like I've been doing since I walked in. Watching. Observing. Seeing how my new dealership operates. The silence in the showroom was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Yo! Sarah's voice trailed off. Should I say it again? James asked. Slower maybe. Sarah's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. I'm calling corporate. Good idea. James nodded. Ask for Thomas. He handled the sale personally last week. Nice man. Very professional. Didn't care what I was wearing when I wrote the check. The security guards had backed away completely now. Kevin was grinning openly. This is impossible, Sarah whispered. You're lying. Am I? James walked over to the Rolls-Royce Ghost, ran his hand along its polished surface. You know what the profit margin is on one of these? The real number? Not the one in the sales manual. Sarah's phone clattered to the marble floor. She didn't pick it up. 30 years in this business, James continued. Started with used Hondas, worked my way up. Learned every model, every option package, every profit margin. Had to be twice as good, twice as knowledgeable. He turned to face her. Because there were always people like you, Ms. Mitchell. People who looked at me and saw this. He gestured to his hoodie, his casual pants. People who made assumptions. Who had standards. Who thought they knew what success looked like. The crowd had grown. More phones recording. More witnesses to whatever was about to happen. I don't believe you, Sarah said, but her voice wavered. Show me proof. James smiled. The meeting's at 10, right? Why spoil the surprise? Security. Sarah's voice rose. I said remove him. The guards didn't move. Ms. Mitchell, one of them said carefully. Maybe we should wait, Dash. That's an order, she screamed. No, James said quietly. It's not. Not anymore. He reached into his pocket again, slower this time. The papers crinkled as he unfolded them. But if you insist on proof... He held up the document. Would you like to read it? Or should I call Thomas myself? Sarah stared at the papers, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. This is... She started. The sale contract, James finished for her. Signed, notarized, and very, very legal. He smiled. Would you like to see the receipt too? It was a very big check. The showroom erupted in whispers. Kevin let out a low whistle. But you can't. Sarah's voice was barely audible. You're not. Not what, Ms. Mitchell? Jamesy's voice hardened for the first time. Not the right type? Not up to your standards? Not good enough to be in your showroom? Sarah opened her mouth, closed it again. Here's what's going to happen, James said, his voice level again. That meeting at 10? It's still on. But first, you and I are going to have a conversation in your office. He paused. My office? Actually, the security guards stepped back, heads bowed slightly. After you? James gestured toward the office door. Sarah didn't move. Unless, James added, you prefer to have this conversation here? In front of everyone? With all these phones recording? Sarah turned stiffly and walked toward the office, her heels no longer clicking with confidence. James followed, but stopped briefly next to Kevin. Good job, son, he said quietly. Standing up like that. We'll talk more after the meeting. Kevin's grin widened. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As James walked to the office, he heard the whispers behind him, so the phone's still recording. But for the first time that morning, he didn't mind the attention. Sometimes, he thought, you had to let people show you exactly who they were before you showed them exactly who you'd become. Sarah's office looked exactly like James expected, meticulously organized, with sales awards covering one wall and a view of the showroom floor through floor-to-ceiling windows. He watched her sink into her leather chair, her composure cracking with each passing second. So, James said, remaining standing, let's talk about what happened out there. Bye. Sarah's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I was just following protocol. We've had issues with Dash. With what? James cut her off. People who look like me. That's not what I Dash. Tell me something, James interrupted again, picking up one of her sales awards. Best Performance, 2023. Impressive. How'd you get that? Sarah straightened in her chair. I increased sales by 40%. Led the region in luxury vehicle dash. No, James set the award down. How did you really get it? What's your system? The color drained from her face. Because I've been watching, he continued. Since I walked in, saw how you treat people. Saw who gets attention and who gets ignored. So Kevin tried to do the right thing and get shut down. Mr. Anderson, I dash a knock at the door interrupted her. Kevin stood in the doorway, looking nervous. I'm sorry to interrupt, but... He glanced at Sarah, then back to James. The police are here. James raised an eyebrow. The police? I called them before I knew, Sarah said quickly. I'll tell them it was a mistake. No, James said. Let them come in. Kevin nodded and disappeared. Moments later, 2 officers entered the office. The older one, his nameplate reading Martinez, looked between James and Sarah. We received a call about a disturbance, Martinez said. Someone refusing to leave the premises. That would be me, James said calmly. He pulled out the ownership papers again. Though it's a bit difficult to trespass in your own business. The younger officer took the papers, examined them, then handed them to Martinez. Everything appears in order, Martinez said after a moment. He turned to Sarah. Did you call us? Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. There was a misunderstanding. Was there? James asked. Or did you see a black man in casual clothes and make assumptions? Just like you do with other customers. That's not dash, Officer Martinez, James cut in. Would you mind staying? You too, Kevin. I think we need witnesses for this conversation. Martinez nodded, stepping back to stand by the door. Kevin remained in the doorway, watching intently. Ms. Mitchell, James said, sitting down across from her desk, let's talk about your sales record. The real one. He pulled out his phone, opened a document. Last 6 months, 48 luxury vehicle sales. Impressive number. He looked up. Want to break down the demographics of those buyers for me? Sarah's jaw clenched. I don't discriminate against customers. Really? James scrolled through his phone. Because according to the security footage I reviewed, yes, I've been doing my homework. You've turned away 32 potential buyers in that same period. Care to guess what they had in common? The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. Martinez's face remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Those people weren't serious buyers, Sarah protested. They weren't qualified dash. Like I wasn't qualified. James's voice remained steady. Let me tell you about one of them. Dr. Marcus Thompson, neurosurgeon. Came in last month wearing scrubs, just got off a 12-hour surgery. You had security escort him out too. I didn't know dash, 2 weeks ago. Lisa Chen, tech executive, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. You told her the cars were probably out of her price range. Sarah's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Last week, Robert Williams Bank CEO drove up in a Honda, his daughter's car. He was helping her move. You didn't even let him through the door. Mr. Anderson, Sarah's voice shook. I can explain dash. No need, James cut her off. The numbers explain themselves. The security footage explains itself. The dozens of complaints filed with corporate explain themselves. He stood up, walked to the window overlooking the showroom. More customers had gathered, watching the office, phones still recording. You know what the difference is between you and me, Ms. Mitchell? He turned back to face her. When I started in this business, I learned every car, every spec, every detail. Because I knew people like you would question my knowledge, would question my right to be here. He picked up another of her awards. But you? You just had to look the part. Wear the right clothes. Have the right appearance. He set the award down hard enough to make her jump. And you used that to keep others out. To decide who was qualified based on nothing but your own prejudices. I followed protocol, she whispered. No. James's voice hardened. You created a protocol of discrimination. You built a system of exclusion. And you did it so smoothly, so professionally, that nobody called you out on it. He turned to Kevin. How many times have you seen her do this? Kevin swallowed hard. At least twice a week. Sometimes more. And why didn't you report it? She's the manager, Kevin said quietly. She would have fired anyone who complained. James nodded. Officer Martinez, in your experience, how often do you get calls like today's? Martinez straightened. From this dealership? At least once a month. Always the same type of complaint. Sarah's face crumpled. Please, Mr. Anderson. I have a family. A mortgage. I can't lose this job. Like Kevin would have lost his for doing the right thing. James asked. Like all the other employees you've threatened? Like all the customers you've humiliated? He walked back to her desk, placed both hands on it, leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. In 30 minutes, we have a staff meeting. I'm going to announce the ownership change. And then, you and I are going to have another conversation about your future here. Are you firing me? Her voice was barely a whisper. That depends, James straightened up, on whether you're willing to learn, to change, to understand why what you did today, what you've been doing for years, is wrong. He turned to the officers. Thank you for coming. I apologize for the false alarm. Martinez nodded. We'll need to file a report. Of course. Include everything you've heard. We might need it later. The officers left, leaving Kevin still standing in the doorway. Kevin, James said, please inform the staff that the meeting will start in 20 minutes, not 10. We need to make some adjustments to the agenda. Kevin nodded and disappeared, closing the door behind him. James sat down again, facing Sarah across her desk. In the showroom beyond the windows, he could see employees gathering in small groups, talking, glancing toward the office. The morning sun had risen higher, making the luxury cars gleam under the LED lights. So, Ms. Mitchell, he said quietly, let's talk about what happens next. But first, I want you to tell me something. Tell me about every person you've turned away, every career you might have damaged, every dream you might have crushed. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. Take your time. We've got 20 minutes, and I want to hear everything. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for a tissue on her desk. 15 minutes had passed, and her carefully constructed world was crumbling with each confession. Last month, she continued, her voice hoarse, there was a young man. Business suit, but it looked used. I told him the Porsche he wanted to see was already sold. Was it? James asked quietly. No. She dabbed at her eyes. We sold it 3 days later. To someone else. James checked his phone. Marcus Wright. 28. Investment banker. He looked up. Did you know that about him? No. I just assumed that's right. You assumed. James stood and walked to the window. The crowd in the showroom had grown larger. 5 minutes until the meeting. Want to tell me about anyone else? Sarah crumpled the tissue in her fist. Please, Mr. Anderson. I have 2 kids in college. This job, it's everything. Like this dealership was everything to my father. James turned back to her. He died never getting to own his dream car. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because people like you decided he didn't belong here. A knock at the door interrupted them. Kevin poked his head in. Sir, everyone's gathered in the main showroom. Thank you, Kevin. James straightened his hoodie. Ms. Mitchell, shall we? Sarah stood on shaky legs. What are you going to tell them? The truth. James opened the door. After you. The showroom had been transformed in the last 20 minutes. The sales staff stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Behind them, a small crowd of customers lingered, phones still out, recording what they sensed would be a memorable moment. James walked to the center of the showroom, Sarah trailing behind him. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls, making the cars gleam like fresh jewels. Good morning, James said, his voice carrying easily across the space. My name is James Anderson. As of last week, I am the new owner of Elite Motors. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several employees glanced at Sarah, who stood slightly apart, her face pale. Some of you witnessed what happened earlier this morning, James continued. For those who didn't, let me be clear. What I saw in my first hour here was unacceptable. He paused, looking at each face in turn. This dealership has a problem. A serious one. And it stops today. Kevin stepped forward. Sir, what kind of changes are you planning? James smiled slightly. First, Kevin, you're promoted. Effective immediately. New position, Customer Experience Director. Kevin's eyes widened. Sarah made a small choking sound. Your first task, James continued, is to review every turned-away customer from the past year. Contact them personally. Invite them back. Show them the respect they deserve the first time. He turned to address the whole staff again. Here's what's going to change. Every customer who walks through that door gets the same treatment. I don't care what they are wearing. I don't care what car they drove up in. I don't care what assumptions you might make about them. He walked over to the Rolls-Royce Ghost. You see this car? $850,000. Know who bought my first luxury car from me? Back when I had my first small lot. A plumber. Wore coveralls to sign the papers. Paid cash. The salespeople shifted uncomfortably. Never judge a customer's worth by their appearance. That's your first lesson. Here's your second. I'll be working from the showroom floor. No corner office. I want to see how you treat people. All people. He turned to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, step forward, please. Sarah moved like a sleepwalker, her heels barely making a sound on the marble floor. Ms. Mitchell made some serious errors in judgment this morning, James said. She showed exactly the kind of behavior that will no longer be tolerated here. Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for the axe to fall. However, James continued, everyone deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become better. Her eyes snapped open. You have a choice, Ms. Mitchell. Option 1, resignation, effective immediately. Option 2, you stay, but under specific conditions. What conditions? Her voice was barely audible. First, you'll work under Kevin. Learn from someone who understands customer service isn't about prejudice and discrimination. Kevin straightened his tie, looking both proud and slightly uncomfortable. Second, you'll undergo extensive training. Not just diversity training, though that's part of it, but you'll start from the beginning. Learn every car, every spec, every detail. Like I did, like Kevin did. James walked closer to her. Third, you'll personally apologize to every customer you've turned away. Face to face. No excuses, no justifications. Just honest acknowledgement of your mistakes and a commitment to do better. The showroom was silent. Even the phones had lowered, their owners too engrossed in the scene to remember to record. And fourth, James's voice hardened slightly. One more incident like this morning, one single complaint about discrimination or prejudice, and you're done. No severance, no references, no negotiations. Understood? Sarah nodded, a quick jerky movement. I need to hear you say it. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I understand. Good. James turned back to the staff. That goes for everyone. This isn't just about Ms. Mitchell. This is about changing a culture. Anyone who can't adapt to these changes should start updating their resume now. He walked to the center of the showroom again. Elite Motors is going to live up to its name. Not because we sell luxury cars, but because we treat every customer, every person, with respect and dignity. That's what makes a business elite. He checked his watch. It's 9:45. We open in 15 minutes. Take that time to think about what you've heard. Decide if you want to be part of this change. If you don't, my office door is open. No hard feelings, no negative references. Just be honest with yourselves, and with me. The staff began to disperse, talking in low voices. Sarah remained where she was, looking lost. Ms. Mitchell, James said quietly, take the rest of the day off. Come back tomorrow ready to start fresh. Kevin will outline your new responsibilities. She nodded and walked stiffly toward her office to gather her things. James turned to Kevin. Ready for your new role? Kevin grinned. Yes, sir. Although, can I ask why me? Because you tried to do the right thing, even when it might have cost you your job. James put a hand on his shoulder. That's the kind of integrity I want in leadership here. The customers who had been watching began to drift away, tucking their phones into pockets and purses. But James noticed they weren't leaving. They were walking toward the cars, beginning to browse. One man, wearing worn jeans and a work shirt, approached hesitantly. Sir, he said to James, I've been wanting to look at that BMW for weeks, but... He trailed off. James smiled. But you weren't sure you'd be welcome. The man nodded. Kevin, James called. Your first customer of the new era is here. Show him everything he wants to see. As Kevin hurried over, James watched Sarah leave through the front doors, her shoulders slumped. Through the glass, he saw her stop at her car, her hand covering her face. Second chances were hard, he thought. But sometimes they were necessary. Not just for the person receiving them, but for everyone who came after. He turned back to the showroom, straightened his hoodie, and prepared to start his first real day as owner. There was work to be done. The next morning arrived with a different energy in the showroom. James stood by the entrance, watching his employees prepare for the day. Kevin moved between the cars, clipboard in hand, checking every detail. The other salespeople straightened their ties and arranged brochures, casting occasional glances at the door. At exactly 8:45 a.m., Sarah Mitchell walked in. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit and designer heels. She wore a simple black pantsuit and practical shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her pearl earrings were noticeably absent. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she said quietly. "Morning." James nodded toward Kevin. "He'll get you started." Sarah walked over to Kevin, her steps measured and uncertain. James watched as Kevin handed her a thick binder and began explaining something, pointing at different cars. The front door chimed. A young black woman in scrubs walked in, car keys jingling in her hand. "Welcome to Elite Motors," James said warmly. "Hi," she smiled tentatively. "I'm Dr. Warner. I called yesterday about the Mercedes E-Class." "Of course." James turned to the sales floor. "Sarah." Sarah's head snapped up. She looked at Dr. Warner, then back at James. Understanding flickered across her face. "Good morning, Dr. Warner," Sarah said, walking over. Her voice shook slightly. I owe you an apology before we begin." Dr. Warner frowned. "An apology? 3 weeks ago, you came in during your lunch break." Sarah swallowed hard. "I told you the E-Class you were interested in had been sold." "That wasn't true." Recognition dawned on Dr. Warner's face. "I remember you. What I did was wrong," Sarah continued. "Discriminatory and unprofessional. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I'm deeply sorry." Dr. Warner's expression hardened. "I went to BMW after that. They were happy to sell me a car. I understand." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "If you'd like to work with another salesperson, I completely understand." "No," James cut in. "This is your chance, Sarah. Show Dr. Warner how things have changed." Dr. Warner looked between them. "What's going on here?" "New ownership," James explained. "And new policies. Sarah is learning, and part of that learning is making things right with customers she's wronged." "I see." Dr. Warner studied Sarah for a long moment. "Well, the BMW dealership couldn't match the specs I wanted." "Show me what you have." Sarah straightened slightly. "The E-Class AMG we have in stock has the exact package you inquired about last time. Would you like to see it?" "Lead the way." As Sarah walked Dr. Warner to the car, James heard her begin to explain the vehicle's features with a thoroughness that surprised him. Clearly, she'd been studying. The door chimed again. This time, a middle-aged man in paint-stained overalls walked in. "Kevin," James called. "Customer." Kevin hurried over, greeting the man with the same enthusiasm he'd show anyone. James smiled. Some lessons were easier to learn than others. The morning progressed steadily. James watched as Sarah handled 3 more customers, including 2 she'd previously turned away. Each time, she started with an apology. Each time, she demonstrated detailed knowledge of the vehicles they were interested in. Around noon, Dr. Warner approached James as Sarah processed her paperwork. "You're the new owner?" she asked. "James Anderson." He extended his hand. "The Sarah I met 3 weeks ago and the Sarah who just sold me a car. They are very different people." James watched Sarah working at her desk, double-checking every detail. People can change when they are given the right motivation. "And what motivation did you give her?" "The truth." James turned to Dr. Warner. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Dr. Warner nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Anderson, I think you've done something remarkable here. And I know quite a few colleagues who might be interested in upgrading their vehicles. We'll be happy to help them." All of them. After Dr. Warner left in her new Mercedes, Sarah approached James. "Mr. Anderson, could I speak with you privately?" They walked to his office, the small one he'd set up near the showroom floor, not the large corner office he'd given to Kevin. "What's on your mind?" James sat behind his simple desk. "I've been thinking about yesterday. About everything you said." Sarah clasped her hands tightly. "I didn't sleep last night. Kept thinking about all the people I'd turned away. All the assumptions I'd made." "Good. That means you're learning." "This morning, with Dr. Warner, I was terrified. But when I started focusing on the car, on the features, on what she actually needed," Sarah shook her head. "It felt different. Better." Because you were doing your job instead of playing gatekeeper. Yes. She met his eyes for the first time. I convinced myself I was protecting the dealership's image. But I wasn't. I was being, say it, James said quietly. I was being racist. The words came out in a rush. And classist. And horrible. And I didn't even realize how bad it had gotten because everyone around me either did the same thing or was too afraid to speak up. James leaned back in his chair. Recognition is the first step. What's the next one? I have 19 more customers to apologize to. Sarah pulled out a list. Kevin helped me track them all down. I've called 5 so far. 3 hung up on me. 1 swore at me. 1 agreed to come in next week. And how does that make you feel? Ashamed. She tucked the list away. But also, determined. I want to make this right. Not just because you told me to, but because it is right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Kevin stuck his head in. Sorry, but there's someone here you both need to meet. They walked back to the showroom. A tall black man in an expensive suit stood examining the Rolls-Royce Ghost. Dad! Sarah stopped short. The man turned. Sarah, I saw the videos. Videos. From yesterday. They're all over social media. You, threatening to have security remove the owner of the dealership because of how he was dressed. Her father's voice was heavy with disappointment. I can explain. Can you? Because I watched those videos and all I could think about was walking into this same dealership 30 years ago, trying to buy a car for your college graduation. Remember what happened? Sarah's face crumpled. They wouldn't show you anything. Said all the cars were sold. And now here you are, doing the same thing to other people. He shook his head. Your mother and I didn't raise you this way. No, you didn't. Sarah wiped her eyes. And I'm trying to change. Really trying. Her father turned to James. Mr. Anderson? I'm Richard Mitchell. I want to apologize for my daughter's behavior. No need, James said. Sarah's doing that herself, 1 customer at a time. Richard looked at the Rolls-Royce. 30 years ago, I could have afforded any car in this showroom. But they took 1 look at my skin and decided I couldn't. He turned to Sarah. And now my own daughter. I'm sorry, Dad, Sarah whispered. I'm so sorry. Prove it, Richard said firmly. Not to me. To them. He gestured at the showroom. To every person who walks through that door. I will. Sarah straightened her shoulders. I am, Mr. Mitchell, James said. Would you like to see what the ghost can do? I think it's time someone showed you proper respect in this dealership. Richard smiled slightly. I would like that, Mr. Anderson. I would like that very much. As Kevin brought the keys and began explaining the car's features, James watched Sarah watching her father. Her face showed a mix of shame and revelation, as if seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. Sometimes, James thought, the hardest lessons came from the people closest to us. And sometimes, that's exactly what we needed to truly change. A week had passed since Richard Mitchell's visit to the dealership. James sat at his desk, reviewing the sales figures from the past 7 days. The numbers told a story of change, not just in policy, but in practice. The door opened, and Kevin walked in with a stack of papers. Final count for the week, he said, placing them on James's desk. 28 sales. That's up 40% from our average. Demographics. Complete mix. Doctors, contractors, teachers, small business owners. Kevin grinned. Turns out when you don't turn people away at the door, they actually buy cars. James flipped through the reports. How's Sarah doing? See for yourself. Kevin gestured toward the showroom. Through the glass walls of his office, James watched as Sarah led a young couple around a BMW M3. The man wore ripped jeans and had tattoos covering both arms. The woman's hijab was bright purple. A year ago, they wouldn't have made it past the front door. She's our top seller this week, Kevin said. And get this, she's scheduled meetings with 15 of the customers she previously turned away. 3 have already come back in. And 2 bought cars. 1 still thinking about it. Kevin sat down. But here's the interesting part. They all said the same thing. That her apology felt genuine. That she really seemed to have changed. James watched as Sarah opened the BMW's door, letting the couple sit inside. Her body language was different now. Open, engaging, focused on their needs rather than her assumptions. Mr. Anderson. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. Could you come out here? There's someone you should meet. James walked onto the showroom floor. A tall man in a well-worn mechanic's uniform stood by the service entrance. "This is Mr. Rodriguez," Sarah said. "He owns the garage 2 blocks down. I turned him away last month when he came to look at the Mercedes S-Class." "Joe Rodriguez," the man extended his hand. "Been fixing luxury cars for 20 years. Always wanted to own one. Sarah called me," he continued. "Apologized. Asked me to come back." He looked at the S-Class. "Still interested in that car? If you're willing to sell to a mechanic." "Mr. Rodriguez," James smiled, "I'd be honored to sell you that car. And I think we could benefit from your expertise. How'd you like to handle some of our more complex service issues?" Rodriguez's eyes lit up. "You mean it?" "Sarah will handle the sale. Kevin will work out the service partnership details." James turned to Sarah. "Unless you have any objections." "None," Sarah said firmly. "Mr. Rodriguez knows these cars better than most of our service team. I was an idiot not to see that before." As Sarah led Rodriguez to the S-Class, Kevin appeared with another update. "Corporate called," he said quietly. "They've seen the social media videos. The ones from that first day." James tensed. "And?" "They're impressed. Sales are up, customer satisfaction is through the roof, and the diversity of our client base has tripled." Kevin checked his tablet. "They want to use us as a model for other dealerships." "Good." James watched as Sarah explained the S-Class's features to Rodriguez, her knowledge evident in every gesture. "Any pushback?" "Some of the other dealers aren't happy. Say we're disrupting the luxury market." Kevin made air quotes with his fingers. "We're not disrupting anything," James said. "We're just selling cars to people who want to buy them. Novel concept, isn't it?" The front door chimed. A group of young entrepreneurs walked in, dressed in everything from suits to hoodies. Sarah finished with Rodriguez and approached them immediately. "Welcome to Elite Motors," she said warmly. "How can I help you today?" James watched as she listened to them. Really listened, without a trace of her former prejudice. When one mentioned they ran a successful tech startup, she didn't blink at their casual clothes. When another said they were looking at the Rolls-Royce, she headed straight for it. "She's really doing it," Kevin said softly. "Actually changing. People can surprise you," James replied. "Sometimes they just need the right motivation." The afternoon brought more customers, more sales, more signs of change. James watched it all from his office, intervening only when needed, letting his team show what they could do. Around closing time, Sarah knocked on his door. "Mr. Anderson, could I show you something?" She led him to her desk and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. "I've been keeping track," she said, opening it. "Every person I turned away, every assumption I made, every mistake." The pages were filled with names, dates, details. This one, she pointed to an entry, was a neurosurgeon who came in during his lunch break. "Scrubs, sneakers. I assumed he couldn't afford anything here." She turned the page. This one was a successful author, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt. "I told her the Porsche she wanted was out of stock. It wasn't." Page after page of similar stories. "I'm contacting each one," she said, apologizing, inviting them back. She looked up at James. "Some tell me to go to hell. They have every right. But others, they are willing to give me a second chance. Like I gave you." "Yes." She closed the notebook. "I keep thinking about what my father said, about how someone did the same thing to him, and I turned into exactly what I should have been fighting against." James nodded toward Rodriguez, who was signing papers for his new S-Class. "Looks like you're fighting now." "I am." Sarah straightened her simple blazer. "Every customer, every sale, every interaction. I'm proving I can change, that I want to change." "Good." James turned to leave, then paused. "You know why I didn't fire you? I've been wondering that. Because firing you would have been easy. For both of us. You'd have gone somewhere else, probably done the same things." He gestured at the showroom. "This is harder. Facing your mistakes. Making them right. Learning to be better. It is harder," Sarah agreed. "But it's also freeing. I didn't realize how much energy I was spending on judging people instead of just helping them." The last customer of the day left with a new BMW. Kevin started closing up the showroom. Rodriguez pulled out in his S-Class, beaming with pride. "Tomorrow's another day," James said. "More chances to prove yourself. I'll be ready." Sarah picked up her notebook. Every customer. Every time. As James walked to his car that evening, he thought about his father. About that day in 1975 when this same dealership had turned him away. About how things had finally changed. Sometimes, he realized, the best revenge wasn't punishment. It was progress. And progress, real progress, came one person, one change, one day at a time. 1 month after James Anderson took over Elite Motors, the dealership held its first ever community open house. The showroom buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life wandered between the luxury vehicles, no one being rushed out or looked down upon. James stood by the entrance, still wearing his signature hoodie, greeting each visitor personally. Kevin moved through the crowd with practiced ease, answering questions and directing people to various displays. "Mr. Anderson," a familiar voice called out. James turned to see Dr. Warner approaching with a group of colleagues, all still in their scrubs. "Just finished our shift," she explained. "Thought I'd show them where I got my E-Class." "Of course," James smiled. "Sarah will be happy to help you." Sarah was already heading their way, tablet in hand. No designer suit, no pearl earrings, just a professional blazer and the same genuine smile she'd been wearing more often lately. "Dr. Warner, wonderful to see you again," she said warmly. "How's the E-Class treating you?" "Beautifully. These are my colleagues from the hospital." Dr. Warner gestured to her group. "They've been admiring my car in the parking lot." "Welcome to Elite Motors," Sarah said, making eye contact with each person. "What kind of vehicles interest you?" As Sarah led the group toward the Mercedes section, James overheard one doctor whisper to Dr. Warner, "Is that the same woman from the video?" "Hard to believe, isn't it?" Dr. Warner replied. "But people can change." The front door chimed again. Joe Rodriguez walked in, wearing his mechanic's uniform, accompanied by several other local business owners. "Mr. Anderson," Rodriguez called out. "Remember those complex service issues you mentioned? Think I found a solution." He introduced the group, all skilled mechanics who specialized in luxury vehicles. "They all run their own shops," Rodriguez explained. "But we could form a service network. Handle overflow work, special cases, emergency repairs. Keep everything local, maintain quality control." James nodded thoughtfully. "Kevin, what do you think?" Kevin, who joined them, was already pulling up schedules on his tablet. "Our service department's been overbooked since word got out about our new policies. A trusted network would help us maintain response times. Set up a meeting for next week," James decided. "We'll work out the details." As Rodriguez and his colleagues explored the showroom, Sarah finished with the doctors and approached James. 3 test drives scheduled for tomorrow," she reported. "And Dr. Warner's team wants to see the new S-Class when it arrives next month." "Good work." James noticed she was holding her leather notebook. "Still keeping track?" "Yes, but it's different now." She opened it to a new section. "Now I'm recording successes. People who came back. Deals that worked out. Relationships rebuilt." The door chimed again. Sarah's father, Richard Mitchell, walked in with a group of men in business suits. "Sarah," he called out. "Remember Mr. Thompson? From my investment group?" Sarah tensed slightly. "The one I turned away last summer." "The same." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "He's ready to hear your apology. And possibly look at that Porsche again." Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked over to the group. James watched as she made her apology, direct and sincere. No excuses, no justifications. Just honest acknowledgement of her past mistakes and a commitment to do better. Mr. Thompson listened, his expression unreadable. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your father tells me things have changed here," he said finally. "They have," Sarah replied. "I have. And I'd be honored to show you our current Porsche lineup, if you're interested." Thompson nodded slowly. "Show me what you've got." As Sarah led them to the Porsche section, Richard approached James. "She called me last night," he said quietly. "Wanted to talk about that day 30 years ago. Really talk about it. And," she cried, "said she finally understood how I must have felt." Richard watched his daughter explaining the Porsche's features to Thompson. Said she was ashamed it took her so long to see it. Kevin joined them, tablet in hand. "Mr. Anderson, the numbers for the month are in. Want to see?" James took the tablet, and Richard looked over his shoulder. The sales figures were impressive, but it was the customer demographics that told the real story. Age, profession, ethnicity, income levels. The diversity was unprecedented for a luxury dealership. "Corporate must be happy," Richard remarked. They are. Kevin grinned. 3 other dealerships have asked for our new training materials. They want to implement similar policies. It's not about policies, James said, handing back the tablet. It's about people. About seeing them for who they are, not what they are wearing or how they look. Across the showroom, Sarah was opening the Porsche's door for Thompson. Her voice carried clearly as she explained the vehicle's specifications, her knowledge evident in every detail she shared. She studies every night, Richard said proudly. Calls me with questions about the technical aspects. Says she wants to be the best, but for the right reasons now. The door chimed again. A young man in a hoodie similar to James's walked in hesitantly. Before anyone else could move, Sarah excused herself from Thompson and walked over. "Welcome to Elite Motors," she said warmly. "I'm Sarah. How can I help you today?" The young man looked surprised at the greeting. "Hi. I was just looking. Probably can't afford anything here. Why don't you let me show you around anyway?" Sarah smiled. Sometimes looking is the first step to finding exactly what you need. James watched as she led the young man through the showroom, treating him with the same respect and attention she'd shown Thompson. "Now that," he said to Richard, "is what real change looks like." The open house continued into the evening. People came and went, some buying, some just looking, but all being treated with the same respect. The showroom stayed bright and welcoming. The staff remained engaged and helpful. Near closing time, Sarah gathered the staff for a quick meeting. 5 sales today, she announced. But more importantly, every single person who walked through that door felt welcome. That's what matters now. As the staff prepared to close up, James noticed Sarah adding to her notebook again. "Good day?" he asked. "The best kind," she replied. "The kind where we proved luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about excellence. Excellence in our products, in our service, and in how we treat people." She closed her notebook and looked around the showroom. "A month ago, I thought I was protecting something by keeping people out. Now I realize we're building something better by letting everyone in." James nodded toward the front doors, where the last customers were leaving. "Tomorrow's another day," he said. "Yes," Sarah smiled. "Another chance to get it right." 2 months had passed since James Anderson first walked into Elite Motors wearing his gray hoodie. The morning sun streamed through the showroom windows, catching on the chrome of newly arrived vehicles. Sarah stood at the entrance, early as usual, reviewing her notes before the day began. "Morning," James called out, walking in with his usual coffee cup. "Mr. Anderson." Sarah looked up from her notebook. The diversity training instructor called. "Everyone passed the final assessment." "Everyone?" "Yes. Even Tom from accounting. And he was the most resistant at first." She closed her notebook. "But that's not why I'm here early." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Remember Marcus, right? The investment banker I turned away last month. The one in the used suit." Sarah nodded. "He came back yesterday. Bought the Porsche." She pulled out her phone. "But he also showed me something. Look." She pulled up a social media post. It showed Marcus standing next to his new Porsche, with Sarah handing him the keys. The caption read, "Second chances work both ways. Thanks to Elite Motors for showing how business should be done." It has 10,000 likes, Sarah said quietly. The comments, people are sharing their own stories. About being judged, turned away, discriminated against. But also about places that got it right. The front door opened, and Kevin walked in with Joe Rodriguez. "Service networks fully operational," Rodriguez announced. 10 shops, all certified, all vetted. "We can handle any repair within 24 hours now. And customer satisfaction is at 98%, Kevin added, showing his tablet. "The other 2% were delays we had before the network started." James smiled. "Good work, both of you." He turned to Sarah. "Any appointments today?" "Full schedule. Including..." She hesitated. "Including someone special." "Who?" "The young man you mentioned. The one who tried to buy a car here in 1983. Sarah swallowed hard. "I found him through the customer database. Called him personally." James froze. "David Chen?" "Yes. He owns a tech company now. Said he's been following our changes in the news." Sarah checked her watch. "He'll be here in an hour." The door chimed again. Dr. Warner walked in with a man in paint-stained coveralls. "Morning, Sarah," she called out. "This is my brother, Mike. He runs a painting business. Needs a new vehicle for work, but also wants something nice for the weekends." Without hesitation, Sarah walked over. Welcome to Elite Motors, Mike. What kind of features are you looking for? James watched as Sarah listened intently to Mike's requirements, noting everything down, treating him with the same respect she'd show any customer. She's come a long way, Kevin said quietly. We all have, James replied. The morning progressed steadily. Sarah moved from customer to customer, her knowledge and sincerity evident in every interaction. The showroom stayed busy, with people from all walks of life examining vehicles, taking test drives, discussing options. At exactly 10 a.m., David Chen walked in. James recognized him immediately, older now, but with the same determined look he'd had 40 years ago. Mr. Chen, Sarah stepped forward. I'm Sarah Mitchell. Thank you for coming. Chen looked around the showroom. Quite different from what I remember. Yes, sir. Very different. Sarah's voice was steady. I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened back then, but for perpetuating that same behavior until recently. Chen studied her for a moment. I heard about the changes here. Saw the videos online. He gestured to her notebook. I understand you keep track of your progress. Yes, sir. Sarah opened the notebook. Every mistake I made, every person I wronged, and every step I've taken to make it right. Show me. For the next hour, Sarah walked Chen through her journey. The discriminatory practices she'd enforced, the people she'd turned away, and the changes she'd made. She showed him customer testimonials, sales data, and the new policies she'd helped implement. Impressive, Chen said finally. But tell me something. Why the change? Really? Sarah glanced at James, then back to Chen. Because I was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. About everything. About who belongs here. About what luxury means. About how to treat people. She straightened her shoulders. And when I realized that, I had a choice. I could either leave, or I could stay and work to fix what I'd helped break. Chen nodded slowly. I came here today planning to tell you about what happened to me after you turned me away. How I went to your competitor, bought my first car, built my business. He looked around the showroom again. But I can see you already understand the cost of discrimination, both to the people you turn away and to yourself. I do, Sarah said quietly. Every day, I understand it more. Good. Chen smiled slightly. Now, about that new Rolls-Royce I saw on your website. As Sarah led Chen to the Rolls-Royce, James noticed Richard Mitchell standing by the entrance. He'd been quietly watching the entire interaction. She did good, Richard said, walking over to James. She did, James agreed. Still doing good. Every day. You know, when I first saw those videos of her. Richard shook his head. I was ashamed. Felt like I'd failed as a father somehow. And now I'm proud. Not of what she was, but of what she's becoming. Richard watched as Sarah explained the Rolls-Royce's features to Chen. She called me last night, talking about the training program she's developing. Ways to help other dealerships change their culture. Kevin joined them, tablet in hand as usual. Corporates interested in her program. Want to roll it out across all their dealerships. Of course they do, James smiled. Nothing motivates change like success. Across the showroom, Chen was signing papers. Sarah stood nearby, her notebook open to a new page. What's she writing now? Richard wondered. Probably adding another success story, Kevin said. She keeps track of those two now. As the morning turned to afternoon, the showroom stayed busy. Sarah moved from customer to customer, her transformation evident in every interaction. No more assumptions, no more discrimination, just genuine service and respect for everyone who walked through the door. Near closing time, Chen returned to pick up his Rolls-Royce. Before leaving, he handed Sarah a business card. My tech company is expanding, he said. We'll need a fleet of vehicles for executives. Call me next week. After he left, Sarah sat at her desk, adding notes to her journal. James walked over. Good day, he asked. Better than good. She looked up. Mr. Anderson, thank you. For not firing me that first day. For giving me a chance to learn. To change. You did the hard part, James said. You chose to change. Sarah nodded toward the showroom, where the last customers of the day were being helped by other salespeople, all of them showing the same respect and attention she'd learned to give. We all did, she said. And we're better for it. James touched the sleeve of his hoodie, the same one he'd worn that first day. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most uncomfortable moments. Yes, Sarah agreed, closing her notebook. And sometimes the best changes come from facing our worst selves. Through the showroom windows, the setting sun painted the luxury cars in shades of gold. Another day was ending at Elite Motors, a day of sales, of service, of respect. A day that proved, once again, that real change was possible. One person, one choice, one moment at a time. 3 months after James Anderson first walked into Elite Motors, the dealership prepared for a special event. The showroom gleamed under the morning light, every car perfectly positioned, every surface spotless. A podium stood at the center, surrounded by chairs. Sarah arrived early, as usual. But today she wore something different, a simple dark suit with a small pin on the lapel showing the Elite Motors logo. Her leather notebook, now filled with 3 months of history, sat on her desk. "Ready for today?" James asked, walking and wearing a new gray hoodie. "Almost." Sarah adjusted a chair slightly, still nervous about the speech. "You'll do fine." The door opened, and Kevin rushed in. "They are here." First group just pulled up. Over the next hour, the showroom filled with people. Dealership owners from across the state, corporate executives, local business leaders, and most importantly, customers, past, present, and future. James spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Dr. Warner and her colleagues, Joe Rodriguez and his network of mechanics, David Chen and his business partners. Richard Mitchell stood near the back, watching proudly as Sarah made final preparations. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent. 3 months ago, she began, I stood in this showroom and tried to have a man removed because of how he was dressed. She gestured to James. That man turned out to be the new owner. But that's not the important part of the story. She opened her notebook. The important part is what happened next. Not just to me, but to this dealership, to our whole understanding of what luxury car sales should be. Sarah turned a page. In the past 3 months, our sales have increased by 120%. Our customer base has diversified across every demographic. Our service network, led by Joe Rodriguez, has become a model for the industry. She looked up at the crowd. But numbers don't tell the real story. People do. Like Dr. Warner, who I turned away when she came in wearing scrubs after a 12-hour surgery. She gave me a second chance, and now half a hospital staff are our customers. Dr. Warner nodded from her seat. Or David Chen, who this dealership turned away 40 years ago. He came back, not just to buy a car, but to show that change is possible. His company's entire executive fleet now comes from us. Chen smiled slightly. Joe Rodriguez, who I assumed couldn't afford our cars because he wore a mechanic's uniform, now has revolutionized our service department and created jobs for dozens of skilled professionals. Rodriguez raised his coffee cup in acknowledgement. But most importantly, Sarah's voice softened. This is about every person who walks through those doors. Every customer who deserves respect, regardless of what they are wearing or how they look. She closed a notebook. Today, we're launching the Elite Standards program. Not standards of exclusion, like I used to enforce, but standards of inclusion, of respect, of real customer service. Kevin stepped forward with a stack of manuals. This program will be implemented across all luxury dealerships in our corporate network. Every salesperson, every manager, every employee will learn what I learned. That luxury isn't about keeping people out. It's about welcoming everyone in. The crowd applauded. Corporate executives nodded approvingly. But before we begin, Sarah continued, I have one last apology to make. She turned to James. Mr. Anderson, that first day, I embodied everything wrong with this industry. I judged you, disrespected you, tried to have you removed. But you saw something worth saving, worth changing. James stood. You could have fired me. Everyone expected you to. Instead, you made me face my prejudices. Made me learn. Made me grow. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. You showed me that true leadership isn't about enforcing barriers. It's about breaking them down. She gestured to the showroom. Look at this place now. Every day, people from all walks of life come through those doors. They're doctors in scrubs, mechanics in coveralls, entrepreneurs in hoodies. And every single one of them gets the same treatment, respect, attention, and genuine service. Sarah picked up her notebook. This book contains my journey. Every mistake, every lesson, every change. I'm having copies made, not to shame anyone, but to show that change is possible. That we can all do better, be better. The room was silent now, hanging on her words. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what luxury meant. I thought it was about exclusivity, about keeping certain people out. She smiled slightly. I was wrong. Luxury is about excellence, in our products, in our service, and most importantly, in how we treat every single person who walks through those doors. She turned to the corporate executives. This program isn't just about sales training. It's about changing the culture of luxury car sales. About recognizing that our customers come in all forms, all styles, all backgrounds. And they all deserve the same respect. Kevin started distributing the manuals. Each of you will go through this program. You'll learn what I learned. You'll face your own prejudices, your own assumptions. And you'll come out better for it. Sarah closed her notebook for the last time. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about selling cars. It's about dignity, respect, basic human decency. She looked around the room. These are the real luxury items, and they should be available to everyone. The applause was immediate and prolonged. As Sarah stepped down from the podium, people crowded around her, asking questions, offering congratulations. James watched from the side, still in his hoodie. Richard Mitchell joined him. When I saw those videos 3 months ago, Richard said, I never imagined this outcome. Sometimes people just need a chance to be better, James replied. And sometimes they need someone to show them how. Richard watched his daughter talking to a group of dealers. Thank you for that. For showing her. The event continued through the morning. Dealers examined the training materials. Corporate executives discussed implementation plans. Customers shared their stories. Near the end, Sarah found James by his usual spot near the entrance. The hoodie, she said. You never changed it. Some things don't need changing. James smiled. Just people's reactions to them. Sarah nodded toward the showroom, where a young woman in worn jeans and a t-shirt was being shown a Mercedes by one of their salespeople. 3 months ago, I would have had her removed, Sarah said quietly. And now I see a customer. A person. Someone who deserves respect. She straightened her Elite Motors pin. That's the real transformation, isn't it? Not just in policy, but in perspective. James watched as the young woman sat in the Mercedes, her face lighting up as the salesperson explained its features. My father never got to buy his dream car, he said. But maybe he helped change things anyway. Through me, through you, through everyone who learns from this program. Sarah touched her notebook. His story is in here now, along with everyone else's. A reminder of where we were and where we're going. The showroom slowly emptied as the event wound down. Dealers left with their training materials. Customers departed in their luxury cars. Corporate executives headed back to implement the changes. But the real change had already happened, right there in that showroom. In the way Sarah greeted each customer. In the way Kevin managed the floor. In the way every employee learned to see people, not presumptions. James stayed until the last person left. He stood in the empty showroom, surrounded by luxury cars gleaming under the afternoon sun. Ready for tomorrow? He asked Sarah, who was arranging her desk for the next day. Yes, she smiled. Another day of getting it right. As James walked to his car that evening, he thought about his father again. About that day in 1975. About all the days since. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. A man in a hoodie walking into a dealership. A manager making the wrong choice, then learning to make the right one. A business transforming from the inside out. And sometimes, just sometimes, those changes last forever. Because luxury isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about how you treat people. Every person. Every time.